As I've listened to what you've said thus far, you've laid a great deal of emphasis on the fact that you don't see the Sabbath as arbitrary, something imposed as a kind of test to see whether you'll just buckle down and obey. And you've certainly given a great deal of meaning, but I've heard people raise this question. All of that may be true, and I can see that it's true, but isn't the seventh day of the fourth commandment, why couldn't it be another day? Does it really matter? Does it have to be the seventh day? What would you say to that? A person might say, look at the Ten Commandments and say, well, now here are 9 of them that if you really love God and you love your fellow human beings, why, that's the way you're going to act. That's the way love acts. But as far as a seventh day, particular day,
yeah, a lot depends
isn't that
on
arbitrary?
The meaning of the word arbitrary. Arbitrariness suggests there is no reason. That God just, because he wanted to, just to show his authority, said, we'll do it this day. I would say if it really were arbitrary, it could be any day. But it's the seventh day because it is so loaded with reasons. Do you ever try on Marjorie? It doesn't matter when we celebrate our anniversary. This year, why don't we have it some other day?
No.
I don't think she'd take it very...
She thinks that the 5th of June is important.
The only day. It makes sense. But then the Bible adds meaning after meaning and reason after reason for the seventh day, which makes it less and less arbitrary. It seems to me that no other of God's commands is associated with so many meanings. It is the least arbitrary of them all. What bothers me most about considering it as arbitrary is the thought that if it is arbitrary, the only reason why we keep it is to prove that we are God's good people. We're the only ones who obey. Whereas I understand the purpose of the Sabbath is to say something about him. But those who keep the Sabbath as meeting an arbitrary requirement are simply saying to the world, look, there aren't many in the world who are good, but we keep the seventh day. The seventh day is not to say something about us. It's to say something about God. So it actually is an important difference.
So the meaning inherent in the seventh day makes that seventh
because he chose to create the world the way he did.
In that way.
Yes. Now, he did make that decision, but I think to do it slowly is not arbitrary. The universe was watching. The charges were to be met. And God, in his own good time, in that very dramatic way, unfolded his plans for our world. And every day we're saying more of the truth about him and the falsity of Satan's charges. That was a dramatic week.
Just an incidental thing here, but maybe someone might be asking this. You've spoken about the fourth commandment.
That's right.
In some thinking and list of commandments, isn't this commandment about the Sabbath the third commandment? How did that happen?
Yeah, I remember once my father wrote to me and said, I've just had a letter from a Lutheran reader of the Signs of the Times about an article on the fourth commandment in the magazine. And the Lutheran reader said, that's the third, isn't it? Well, that's true. Our Roman Catholic friends number the commandments so that the Sabbath commandment is number 3. Now, it doesn't mean they're leaving any out. They just divide number 10 into 9 and 10. Strictly speaking, the 10 Commandments read the same in all versions of the Bible. No one has tampered with the Decalogue, not at all. Now, in some catechisms maybe, or Bible study lessons, based on the Bible, where the 10 Commandments are abbreviated, then they may read a little differently. But the Decalogue has not been tampered with. Reads the same everywhere. Of course, there's nothing inspired about Numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, and 10. Who said the Sabbath was the fourth?
Well,
it's called the Sabbath commandment.
All right.
Yes.
But now, in some listings, isn't one of the commandments about graven images left out?
Well, in the Catechism.
In the Catechism,
yeah,
not in the Bible.
Not in the Bible.
That's very important point.
In the Bible, it's not.
They're all there.
That's right. Good.
In whatever Bible, whatever translation.
That's right. You know, tonight I've used 2 excellent Roman Catholic translations. They're superb.
I noticed that.
They're really superb.
I can hear one of our friends asking, as I have been asked before, in the light of all this, do I have to keep the Sabbath to be saved? If I don't keep the Sabbath, am I going to be lost?
That reflects on our discussion earlier of what sin is, and if you think of sin as just breaking the rules, then one might follow that line of thought. If I break that rule, I'll be lost. It all depends whether there's the distrust and the rebelliousness involved in the failure to keep the Sabbath. I think rather it's the Sabbath was made for us to be of great benefit. If I don't observe it, I lose. If I don't take my medicine, I lose. God offers it to us. There are some who have never heard of it. I don't know if the thief on the cross ever kept one.
Didn't have much of a chance,
No.
perhaps.
So, in the legal model, if you violate that rule as any other, then you're out, because sin is the breaking of the rules. Sin is the internal distrust and rebelliousness and unwillingness to listen.
So the meaning that God has in the Sabbath for us, it makes it very important whether I say, well, I don't want to be involved with that, just as you were illustrating as you concluded that presentation. But now, Graham...
if as you address yourself to the gift that God has given us, and it inspires a hostility within you, a rebelliousness within you, an unwillingness to listen, that would be the serious thing.
We're back where the problem began.
Exactly, yeah.
Someone has asked this question. Wasn't the Sabbath, though, in spite of all that has been said, wasn't the Sabbath, in Colossians, the 2nd chapter, doesn't Paul say that the Sabbath has been nailed to the cross? And in the light of that, that no one should judge you regarding what you eat or drink or religious festivals or even a Sabbath day. What about that Colossians 2?
That's so significant. It's worth several hours. How to do it in a moment or two. I think the first thing to do there is to note what was nailed to the cross. The King James says the handwriting of ordinances, and that's taken to be the law. Now, actually, that word handwriting, I'll pronounce it to show you I know what's there, kairographon. Kair is hand and graphon is handwriting. That's a very technical term for an agreement, for a bond. It's the sentence that stood against us that was nailed to the cross. But to suggest that the Sabbath was nailed to the cross suggests that the Sabbath was against us, because it says that when this handwriting was nailed to the cross, it is what was contrary to us, against us. He took it out of the way because it was bad. Now, nowhere in the Bible is the Sabbath pictured as against us, contrary to us. It was given to help us. Here Jesus says the Sabbath was made for you, and in a moment I'm going to nail it to the cross because it's been against you. He says it's for you. So they've been nailing the wrong thing to the cross. Rather, when he died, he took care of the sin problem. He took care of the sentence, or whatever word you want to use there. Therefore, let no one judge you in these legal matters. And I think when he says, don't let anyone judge you with respect to the Sabbath either, he's saying, you're right, don't you go around condemning people who disagree with you on the Sabbath. See, sometimes we say, that's ceremonial Sabbaths. Don't criticize people when they disagree on the ceremonial. But when they disagree with you on the seventh day, you can go and condemn them all you want to. You can't condemn anybody for anything. That's not our business. Same way in Romans 14, Paul says, one man esteems all days alike. Another man esteems one day above another. And I'm about to come and imprison some of you who don't agree with me. No, he said, let everyone be fully persuaded in his own mind. And who are you to criticize another? I include the seventh-day Sabbath in that. We are in no position ever to criticize or condemn anybody else who disagrees over this matter of the Sabbath. Paul says, we shall each give account of ourselves to God. So going back to Colossians, something that was against us was nailed to the cross. And once we understand how God has handled the sin, distrust, rebellion problem, then we don't go around condemning other people. But in my own heart, I'm very much persuaded that the Sabbath is for me. I wouldn't want to waste it. I hope I can make it look good to other people so they won't waste it. And we present it as a gift, not an obligation.
But Graham, some of our friends of other denominations, other backgrounds, have raised the question about Sabbath keeping being legalistic. Mm-hmm. When you set out and you're concerned about sundown and the time and when is the Sabbath over and what is appropriate to do on the Sabbath, aren't you back into a kind of worrying about and a kind of bondage where you're so careful about these things? Isn't that legalism?
Yeah, the word legalism needs to be defined, and I'm thinking maybe the next 2 Fridays we might have a chance to talk about that. To me, the essence of legalism is preoccupation with one's legal standing with God. And so many of these people who think Sabbath keepers are legalistic are themselves utterly concerned with their legal standing with God, and thank God that his Son came and paid the penalty so that they could be in good legal standing. So you see, if you have the legal model, you're a legalist. If you have the other model, you're saying, God, I don't want to miss a thing you've given me. And God says, well, among other things, I give you the Sabbath. It was made for you. And you say, what for? Well, read the Bible through and read some of the things we looked at tonight. And you say, God, I need that. I really do. And so we keep the Sabbath as a blessing.
It makes so much difference whether a person is keeping the Sabbath as something that's required to be fulfilled, or whether it's a celebration with God of the glorious things that the Sabbath stands for.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be all about freedom. If a person in the middle of church tomorrow morning while you're preaching does not feel free, maybe he should get up and walk out and take a breath of fresh air and decide whether he wants to come back in or not. Nobody should be sitting here because he has to. Everybody should be sitting here because he feels so good about it feels free.
May have some
Hope you won't lose your audience.
We may have some boys and girls walk out tomorrow to hear that message, or maybe some fathers and mothers.
Well, now, when it comes to the little children now, you see, that does come into next week, God's emergency measures. You can't expect little children to understand these things. Like, they won't brush their teeth because it's good to brush their teeth. They'll brush their teeth because Mommy says so. And don't upset Mommy. She might take measures. And so our little children may not gladly follow us to church. You want to preserve their freedom and teach them responsibility, but when it gets to be time to go, you say, Billy, we're leaving, and you're coming too. So you may have children sitting in the pews under some duress, but you hope they'll sit there long enough to hear the pastor tell them that God values nothing higher than their freedom, and they'll feel good about it.
Well, not only the pastor to tell them, but the parents to help show them.
Oh, that's the most important of all, actually.
Important to do that.
Yeah, that's the most important.
When we talk about the seventh day, we're talking about a long period of time, millenniums.
Oh, yeah.
And the question has been asked, how do you know what day is the seventh day?
Has it been lost?
Could we be mistaken?
Yeah. Well, one thing sure, nothing has meant more to the devout Jew than the week and the seventh day. And he could look back certainly to when the manna fell, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and double on Friday, and none on Saturday. He knew that was the seventh day by God's direction. And no devout Jew has lost the weekly Sabbath since that time. I would say that's not debatable. We still know.
Jesus didn't seem to be confused when he was here either.
Yes, sure. Wouldn't Paul have researched it? Kind of man he was.
And even for that matter, the idea of Sunday as a day of the resurrection would even confirm, wouldn't it?
Again.
The same consistency of the weekly cycle.
Yeah, that's no serious question at all, I believe.
Now, the Sabbath command, the fourth commandment, talks about thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy manservant, and so forth. Is the Sabbath a day to just sit in a rocking chair in total idleness? What is the meaning of this, thou shalt not do any work?
Do any work. It almost seems hazardous that God would say, in it thou shalt not do any work, and I'm not going to tell you what work is. I take that as a compliment. He says, look, the day is yours. I've suggested its many meanings. If you don't want to keep it, I can't make you keep it. Because it's merely to sit there and do nothing all day under duress is not keeping it. It's supposed to be a delight. And so God leaves it up to us to decide what work is. But many devout people through the years, as you know, have consulted their theologians to determine what work is. And there's a very large volume I have which describes Sabbath work. And in this book, it's called the Mishnah. It says there are 40 kinds of work save one, 39 kinds, and each of the 39 is broken down into tiny details. How far may you walk on the Sabbath? May you carry a pencil on the Sabbath? How many letters can you write on the Sabbath? I don't mean epistles, I mean letters in the alphabet, all spelled out. The beauty of it is you always know whether you're keeping it or not. Actually, those rules leave you with such a fear that you've broken the Sabbath that Jesus said, you place burdens on people that are heavy to bear. I just said, it's your day, in it you shall not do any work. Remember me. So it is left up to us, and I like that.
So then how would one take that statement in terms of the work to earn their livelihood, that kind of thing? How would you understand that?
Well, I think that's in the verse in Isaiah, not doing your own business and not working for gain. You see, that's in there.
That reminds me of something we were talking about earlier. I've been told that Dear Abby, a couple of weeks ago, in her column, in the LA Times was responding to a girl who wrote saying that she was going to marry a Seventh-day Adventist. And she wondered what that might mean. And Abby suggested that perhaps she ought to talk with the man's pastor and find out. But then another person wrote in and said, I know about Seventh-day Adventists, and if you marry a Seventh-day Adventist, there are a whole lot of things you won't be able to do. Among these, this person went on to list several of these, and then they suggested that you and your husband, as far as the Sabbath, would never, on the Sabbath, have any kind of marital relationships.
Yeah, I read that. That was number 7 appropriately on the list.
And the idea was that Isaiah 58 says that you shouldn't do anything at your own pleasure on the Sabbath. Now, what does that, is God wanting us to be unhappy on the Sabbath?
Well, the day my middle daughter read that, she phoned me up and said, when you're down in West Covina tonight for Book by Book, stop by the house. I want to write a letter to dear Abby. So I did a little research on the meaning of the verse, and I brought that along in the back of my Bible. You know, if you look at a good translation of Isaiah 58:13, it really reads, if you restrain your foot on the Sabbath from doing your business on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath delightful and Yahweh's holy day honorable, if you honor it by refraining from business, from pursuing gain, and from excessive talk, interestingly enough, then you will delight in Yahweh, and I'll make you ride upon the heights of the earth. That translation is in the Anchor Bible. There's no more scholarly translation ever. And by the way, that's by John Mackenzie, S.J. You know, the Anchor Bible is jointly produced by Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. But in other versions, I wrote down quite a few, and they all agree that the word pleasure is better translated business, that on Sabbath you can enjoy yourself all you like, but you don't do your own business on that day. You don't pursue your own interests on that day. It even says, if you value my holy day and honor it by not traveling, working, or talking idly on that day. And on this talking idly, the Jerusalem Bible says, abstaining from travel, from doing business, and from gossip. In the Septuagint it says, and from malicious talk.
When you said too much talk, I thought he was talking about Sabbath sermons, but this is something
that's why I looked that up with care.
Oh, I'm glad.
It's that you will not gossip or engage in malicious talk, whether in pew or pulpit. But the point there is, at the very first, it says, if you call the Sabbath a delight, we're supposed to enjoy the day, but we'll not pursue our own business and our own worldly gain on the day. And then it makes good sense, doesn't it?
Well, now, here's a command that you should call the Sabbath a delight. How can you command something like that?
Well, that's what shows me that it can't be arbitrary. God says, if you really enjoy it, and I'm telling you, you have to. Now, we know from experience you can't do that. When your girls were growing up, I don't know how they felt about spinach or other vegetables. I mean, did you ever say to one of your girls, now look, don't make any more faces. I want you to eat your spinach. Yes, Daddy. Yeah, but I want you to enjoy it. Yes, Daddy. I want you to tell me how delicious it is. Daddy, I'd be fibbing if I did and breaking one of the other commandments. There's no way you can order somebody to enjoy anything. Now, this is what I like. The things that God desires the most. Love, you can't command it. Trust, you can't command it. The enjoyment of the Sabbath, you can't command it.
It's an invitation.
It's an invitation. We either do it or we don't. And if we really observe the day, we do it in the highest sense of freedom, and it is truly a delight.
One of our friends has written this question, Graham, that takes us just a bit away from the subject of the Sabbath, but still, I think, tied into it. The larger view, this person writes, seems very intricate, very subtle, and needing of a lot of study. Does this imply that a simpler view is still necessary for the masses of people who do not have the time or the knowledge to understand the larger view? Now, another card has come in similar. Let me read this. What is the truth about God? I feel it must be simple, and yet it seems so complicated, almost too complicated to encompass. Please help me understand. How would you respond to those questions?
I think those are very fair questions. I think that the number one characteristic of the larger view is its simplicity, and that it's not complicated. However, it might require a good deal of study. The more one studies, the less complicated it becomes. I don't think there's any substitute for taking time for study.
So maybe the plea for simplicity is perhaps a temptation to flee from the hard work of thinking.
Yeah, there's no shortcut to this. But what I like is that when you apply the very best scholarship you can muster, I mean, maybe you know the biblical languages and you know all about textual criticism and the history of religions, everything you possibly can. You have all the tools for biblical research. Then if you do a thorough job on the 66, you come up with this view about our God. And all he asks of us is trust. But he doesn't ask us to trust him as a stranger, nor to trust mere claims, but demonstration. I don't think anything could be simpler than that. But I see validity to the question. Paul on Mars Hill delivered himself of a magnificent address. He quoted the philosophers, he quoted the poets, he used long words. In fact, he used the longest word in the Greek New Testament. To the Athenians, he said, "Oh, you are Deisidaimonos Terus." That's all one word. Then he won a few. But he got to thinking, I'll never preach like that again, magnificent as it was. And in 1 Corinthians he says, I will never preach again in long words, making things so philosophical and complicated. This one thing I'll do from here on, I will preach the message about Christ and him crucified. So Paul, with his scholarship, eventually focused in on the all-important thing. But when you preach Christ and him crucified, you're preaching the larger view, the one who died for angels as well as men. So the focus led him to the larger view. But he was quite a scholar. I believe the thief on the cross knew enough to be saved, but I wouldn't want to settle for that. I'd like to learn what Paul did. And as long as life shall last, I'm going to investigate. But if my discourse has become more complicated, I'm moving in the wrong direction. So I like the implication here. It ought to be clear, it ought to be simple, but there are no shortcuts to that.
A question came in last week that really touched my heart. This person wrote, how are we who have been raised as Seventh-day Adventist Christians and have been taught to fear God and his judgments, to change to a love relationship? When you asked last Friday night, would you be comfortable if the Father walked in, I hesitated to answer, and then I said, I hope so. I'm afraid. How do I dispel this fear?
Oh, another one who'd love to hear that question would be God himself. You know, if you'd look at God and say, God, I hesitate to tell you this, but I'm scared. And he'd say, I appreciate that. Wonder what he'd do. Would he say, I think maybe I better not talk to you any longer, you're so scared. I'll send for my son, you know? Well, in practicality, I think the solution is to become convinced in Scripture that the one who came is fully God. People aren't afraid of Jesus, but to realize that the one who is with us is no less than God. And that's what the Sabbath reminds us of, that gentle Jesus, who was afraid of him? He is the Almighty Creator. And then if we could just come to the place where we truly accept what we call the testimony of Jesus. The ultimate testimony of Jesus is, you want to know what my Father is like? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. We find it hard to believe that. So I think we need to read it over and over and come to the place where we really are convinced. You want to know what God is like? Look at Christ, for Christ is God. And as we think of it, number one, it seems incredible, so it takes a little time. And number two, the enemy is opposed to our knowing this, so he will throw up every roadblock he can to keep us from believing this incredible truth.
Now, next Friday night, you're going to talk about God's emergency measures. Right. That will be important in helping us to understand some things that have raised questions.
Because these measures can be misunderstood as supporting Satan's charges, when I think his use of the measures speaks very well of him.
You're going to talk about some of the risks that God has
That's
run
right.
in the things that he has done. So next Friday night,
God's emergency measures.
7 o'clock here at the University Church.
Right.